Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 25, Part 7, Flashes of Combat 2. Carthan felt his own voice cheer with his fellows as the announcement came through. The final evacuation shuttle has launched for the surface. He spared a glance at the plot and looked at what seemed almost like an unbroken line of shuttles heading from the rear of the fleet, down to the planet, and back up. At least the fleet was able to deal with those atmospheric craft trying to take shots at our shuttles and the embassy. He allowed himself a small chuckle. You'd think that the Zoltans would have learned that the humans have a whole new definition of the term precision fire. He turned back to his station and continued to try and tweak his sensor feeds. Having to run dark is hard. I could find out so much if I could send out a pulse of my own. Still, having control of so many of the microsensors helps. He considered the shifting formation of the enemy fleet and decided to risk a pulse. Then, one of the microsensors that sat in the middle of the enemy fleet's position fired off a pulse and managed to deliver its data before several Exaltan fighters and 2 of their frigates splashed it. The sensor gave him an excellent picture of the enemy. He shook his head. They still think using a double wheel formation really protects them all that much. We can still estimate and fire through their gaps to hit the firing ships. It is a bit more difficult, sure, but he checked to make sure that the flagship had received the data from the pulse so that they could update their firing solutions, then went back to looking for his own opening. I just hope that Intel is right about the sublight weakness of that Overlord-class ship and their difficulties in firing at FTL targets, because if they aren't, not only will this strike group fail, but we won't last long. He continued to update the estimated movements of the Overlord's rearguard screens, as well as the rest of the ships behind the disk, while checking periodically on the flag radar's estimates for the enemy's frontal screen of ships. I hate to admit it, but that double disk and spoke formation is more effective here than it might be otherwise. We have to stay between them and the planet, so going around it, except with fighters, isn't an option, and hitting openings is hard, even if we are good at predicting them. Even using the flagship's main gun is a problem, since it is taking on so many of the shuttles, and therefore has to stay behind our own screens. A movement he hadn't predicted interrupted his musings. He zoomed in and trained every passive sensor in the area on the ships that had moved out of pattern. He found that an entire flight of fighters had broken through to that segment of the formation and managed to hamper the engines of several of the rear guard ships. We will not get another opportunity like this. He keyed a request for control of the plot and sang out to his captain. We have an opening, putting it on the plot. The captain reviewed his findings for the briefest moment, then broke into an all-tooth smile that scared him a little. Comms, message to the flag. Request kamikaze protocol on Godzilla wing on my mark. Helm, do you have a course plotted for me? The course plotted, aye? A series of lines moving from their position and going past the rear of the Overlord appeared in the plot as the helmsman continued. Courses on plot for FTL in 1, 3, and 5 mics. Excellent. Engineering, I want us in that 3-minute course. Do what you have to do, but get that singularity cracking. Comms, send that course to the flag and help them coordinate their main gun firing solution. All hands, brace for combat, we are going in. Carthan felt a low growl in his throat and a smile on his face. My name, and the name of my ship, will live forever, whether we survive this or not. Eldia stood in the darkest corner she could find of the human situation room, where the colonel and 4 of his people directed the human and allied forces for the battle. She'd managed to get her hands on a pistol at some point and snuck into this room to watch, and found it was all she could do to keep herself quiet when she wanted to grab the colonel, shake him by his camouflage, and scream at him to bring Henry in. Already, probably the only thing that stopped her was that she knew it wouldn't do any good if the man gave such an order. Her Henry had directly saved the lives of so many of the ambassadors at this point, even if many of them didn't know it. The colonel and his people kept bouncing Henry through the council complex like a Gouter ball in a deadly game of keep away. She knew that only two things had kept Henry alive, and both of those came down to human preparedness. The first was that humanity had used their usurped control of council systems to frustrate Xultan communications. They didn't have everything jammed for the Xultans, just segments and certain types of messages. Mostly they concentrated on cutting off comms to any larger masses of Xultan troops, or any groups that got too close to boxing Henry, or anyone else, in. The second was the prototype mobility device that could allow him to move at great speed with minimal effort for short distances, letting him pop up somewhere, draw Xultan attention, get them to give chase, then literally fly down corridors as soon as they lost line of sight. The Colonel had one of the controllers dedicated to keeping up with Henry and coordinating his movements. She saw Henry lean against a wall and try to catch a breath for a moment, and had to stifle a sob. How many pulse hits has he taken? How much can a human bleed and stay up? A medic came running up to him, gave him a couple of pills and some water, and was sewing closed a wound in his arm. That is my fiancée, not a blanket, damn it. She kept her hands clasped together in a white-knuckled grip to keep herself from running over, grabbing a headset and screaming at him to get himself to the embassy. You've seen people get stitches before. Yes, with heavy local anesthetic. She forced herself to take a quiet, slow, deep breath. It is almost over. Only 3 more ambassadors are still out there, and 2 of them are almost here. Everyone else has evacuated already, even most of the surviving soldiers. He will be back here soon. Enibal, the Duke, and his wives are all out already. Cathan held onto his station with one hand while frantically working his scans with the other, while the ship pinwheeled around him and his breathing sounded far too loud in his helmet. Engineering had pulled energy from every system they could, including life support, and as much as they dared from the inertial compensators, just to give them one more erg of power in the shields and engines. The Overlord ship had taken longer than anyone had dared hope to notice them on the sensors. A fact he attributed mostly to the electronic warfare team on his ship and the flag. They'd blanketed space with so much static that no one could see anything on any scope at all. When the fog lifted, they'd been well underway, and probably discounted at first as a sensor ghost. Concentrate. He gritted his teeth as the decking bucked beneath him when another rocket got a little too close, and some of its blast made it through the shield. His helmet comm became a garbled mess of damage reports, calls for help, responses, hell maneuvers, and a near-constant stream of orders from his captain. Does she even breathe? He used his legs to brace for a moment and deselected several comm bands, cutting the chatter to things he might need to hear, and ran another scan of the Overlord ship. Come on, you Pisizu. Show me your belly. I know it is here somewhere. Follow the ridge between the 2 main thrusters, pierce the interference of the engines, and... Cathan slammed his hands into his controls, painting the target for his gunners, and ordered, didn't even confer with his captain before calling out. All weapons, firing solution on painted target Lima. Concentrate all hostile fire on that node. Fire at will, and that one is will. Even the emergency lighting went out as every energy weapon on that side of the ship fired an instant later. 3 more heartbeats and the decking beneath him rattled as the slug-throwing guns got their targeting solutions locked in and fired, almost in unison. Part of him wondered which gunning crew would win the captain's prize for hitting the target first, but the thought barely skittered across the edge of his awareness. He watched the shifting pattern of the Overlord's shields and engines as it tried desperately to find a way to cover that spot with some level of shielding all the thruster cowlings, but it had no chance. The output from the thrusters created too much shield interference, and the captain had put them fearlessly in the wake of the big ship's thrusters. That exhaust might be ablating layers off their hull, but it also put them square in the place to do the most damage. Helm rolled the ship, and Cathan worked his controls furiously to make sure that the target stayed properly painted and monitor its condition. Over 2/3 of their energy weapons fired true, and over half of those pierced the thruster-weakened shield section, and struck home, straight into the Overlord's primary shield generator. The main shield began to weaken. Some of the slugs and missiles got deflected into the Overlord's roaring thrusters, but enough of them made it through. Cathan roared in triumph as he watched another missile go through, then keyed his captain. "It is now or never, Captain. That shield isn't down yet, but we will have it down in moments." The captain nodded, and he heard her cut the Flag Admiral into the channel. "Admiral, we have confirmation on imminent failure of primary shield for the Overlord. We have severely damaged the generator node, and will have it down shortly. Your window is open." "Acknowledged, Captain. My compliments to your crew. Now get them out of there. Getting out of there, aye." The captain ordered a ceasefire, and to redirect power to shields and engines. Cathan's leg muscles screamed in cramped agony as he held himself in place in front of his console and watched the ordnance in flight zero in on their target. Another voice rang out. "Main gun has fired the kitchen sink." He watched the last of their fire slam into the Overlord's tail, saw the shield generator buckle, and checked his readings. "Overlord primary shield down." He looked up to watch the path of the kitchen sink slug launched from his fleet's flagship. He imagined he could see the actual hunk of metal on the plot, and his ears laid back as he considered the force behind the thing. A solid piece of metal, as big as a good-sized ground vehicle, accelerated closer to sea than any material object has a right to travel. The flagship's main gun is going to need a retrofit after firing that one round, but with the Overlord down to auxiliary shields, the round tore through both layers of the Zoltan fleet's defensive disc, losing only a small amount of mass. Cathan felt his brows lower and began to calculate the thing's trajectory. It will hit the Overlord there, probable deflection angles put it going this way, account for safety bulkheads and seals. The Overlord will probably survive this, but that thing is going to take out at least 2 of the secondary shield generators, and the bridge. Take that, voter scum. Most likely path after that is... "Captain, placing an exclusion zone on the plot. This cone is the most likely exit vectors for the flagship slug, and we are headed right for it." The captain gave the necessary orders, and Cathan felt his helmet slam against his console as the helm adjusted course.